Somewhere in your home, or your neighbor's, there is probably a small round machine that hums quietly across the floor, bumps gently into a chair leg, turns, and keeps going. A decade ago, that little machine felt like the future arriving one room at a time. And there was one company that made it happen, a pioneer that didn't just build a better vacuum, but invented an entire category that hadn't existed before it came along. For years it owned that category so completely that its name practically became the word for the thing itself. To buy a robot vacuum was, in most people's minds, to buy theirs. It was dominant, admired, the textbook example of a company that saw the future first and got there first. And then, almost overnight, it came apart. Not because someone built a smarter robot. Not because people stopped wanting clean floors. It nearly collapsed for reasons that have almost nothing to do with the machine itself: a flood of cheap imitators, a rescue deal worth well over $1 billion, and a single decision made by regulators on the other side of the world. By the end of this story, the value of its stock would fall by something close to 99% from its peak. This is the story of how you can invent the future, dominate it, become the very definition of your own product, and still be cleaned out of everything you built. Because the most dangerous thing in business isn't failing to create something new. It's succeeding, and then discovering, too late, that creating a category and owning it are two completely different things. To understand how far this company fell, you first have to understand how unlikely its rise was, because it did not begin in a living room. It began with machines built for places no human wanted to be. The company grew out of the world of serious robotics, the kind with deep roots in military and defense work. Before it ever thought about your carpet, it was building rugged robots for dangerous jobs, the sort of machine you send in to inspect or disarm a bomb, so that a person doesn't have to. The DNA of this company was hard engineering, harsh environments, machines that had to keep working when lives were on the line. And then its leaders made a leap that sounds obvious now and sounded almost absurd at the time. What if that same intelligence, a robot that can sense its surroundings, navigate on its own, and make decisions without a human steering it, could be shrunk down, made cheap enough, and pointed at the single most boring problem in every household on Earth? Cleaning the floor. It was a wild bet. The idea of a robot doing your chores belonged to cartoons and science fiction. Nobody had a category for it, because the category simply did not exist. There was no shelf in any store labeled autonomous home robots, no habit in people's minds, no proof that ordinary families would ever trust a machine to wander their homes unattended while they were out. This company would have to build not just the product, but the very desire for it. And astonishingly, against every reasonable expectation, it did exactly that. When the little robot finally arrived, it did something rare and precious: it created demand out of nothing. People were charmed by it. The idea of coming home to floors that had quietly cleaned themselves felt like a small, affordable slice of the future you could actually hold in your hands. And the timing could not have been better. This was the dawn of the smart home, the years when people were just beginning to fill their houses with devices that connected, listened, and did things on their own. A self-directed robot roaming the floor fit that dream perfectly. Sales climbed. The company became the clear leader, and then it became something more than a leader. It became the default. When people pictured a robot vacuum, they pictured this one. When they talked about owning one, they often just used the company's name as if it were the name of the object itself, the way people reach for a single famous brand to mean tissues, or search engines, or sticky bandages. That is the holy grail of business, the thing every marketer secretly dreams about: to become so completely synonymous with your category that your competitors aren't even selling a rival product anymore, they're just selling a copy of you. From the outside, this looked like an unbreakable position. The company had the head start, the reputation, the technology, the name recognition, and a growing market that it had personally conjured into existence. But here's the part that should quietly unsettle you, because it is the hidden trap underneath almost every success story like this one. The very thing that made the company famous, teaching the entire world to want a robot that cleans the floor, was also an enormous, expensive gift it was handing, for free, to everyone who would come next. Here is the cruel logic of being first. When you invent a category, you pay for absolutely everything. You spend the years and the fortune convincing people the product should even exist. You absorb the risk, the education, the doubt, the false starts. And once you finally succeed, once the whole world agrees that yes, a robot that vacuums your floor is a thing worth owning, that hard-won belief does not belong to you alone. It becomes the air that everyone breathes. And that is precisely what happened next. A flood of competitors arrived, many of them offering machines that did most of what the Pioneer's robot did, at a fraction of the price. They didn't have to invent the desire, the Pioneer had already done that for them, at its own expense. They didn't have to prove the category was real, it obviously, undeniably was. All they had to do was copy the core idea, cut the price, and undercut. And for a huge number of shoppers, a robot vacuum that costs far less and gets the floor mostly clean is simply good enough. This is the quiet force that grinds down so many pioneers, and it has a name: commoditization. It's what happens when a special, premium, magical thing slowly hardens into an ordinary, interchangeable one, judged mostly on price. The Pioneer tried to stay ahead the only way it knew how, by making its robots smarter, fancier, more capable, more expensive. But every clever new feature was quickly imitated and sold for less by someone else. Its margins thinned. Its share of the very market it had created began to slip away, handed piece by piece to rivals who had never spent a single dollar building the dream. The inventor was being beaten not on invention, but on the one weapon it could never win with: cost. By now the company was in real, serious trouble. It was still a famous name, still a leader in reputation, but the numbers underneath the surface were bleeding. Growth had stalled. Profits were vanishing into the price war. And then, like a lifeline thrown from the sky, salvation appeared in the form of a giant. One of the largest online retailers in the entire world, a company with almost limitless money and a deep, obvious interest in filling people's homes with connected devices, agreed to buy the struggling Pioneer. The price was enormous, a deal valued at well over $1.5 billion. For the Pioneer, this was not just good news, it was everything. It meant survival. It meant the backing of one of the most powerful companies on the planet, access to a colossal customer base, and an escape hatch from the slow grind that was quietly killing it. For the founder and the shareholders, it looked like a fitting reward for having invented an entire industry from scratch. The lifeboat had finally arrived. There was just one catch, and that single catch would turn out to be the whole story. A deal that size, between a giant that already touches almost everything you buy and the dominant maker of a device that quietly maps the inside of your home, does not simply happen because two sides shake hands. It has to be approved. Powerful regulators, the government watchdogs whose entire job is to guard against any one company growing too dominant, get to inspect the deal and decide whether to let it through. And as the Pioneer bet its entire future on this rescue closing, and even accepted a lower price along the way as the process dragged on and on, a group of regulators far away was growing more and more uneasy about what the deal might really mean. The worry, in the end, was not really about vacuum cleaners at all. It was about power. Regulators, in this case, competition authorities in Europe, looked at the proposed marriage of an enormous online marketplace and the leading maker of home robots, and they saw something that made them deeply nervous. A company that already controls a vast digital storefront, they reasoned, might use its ownership of a popular home robot to quietly tilt the entire playing field, to favor its own device over rivals, to squeeze competitors off its shelves, to gather even more intimate data about the layout and the daily habits of millions of homes. Whether or not you happen to agree with that fear, it was enough. After a long, draining, exhausting review, the deal collapsed. In 2024, under the heavy shadow of that regulatory pressure, the giant and the Pioneer finally walked away from each other. The rescue was dead. And this is the exact moment the whole story pivots on. The Pioneer had not merely hoped for this deal, it had leaned its entire weight against it, like a man leaning on a door that suddenly opens the wrong way. It had spent precious months and precious energy waiting for approval instead of fixing the deeper problem underneath. It had let its fate ride on a decision made in government offices on another continent, by people it had never met, about concerns that had nothing to do with whether its robots were actually any good. When that door finally swung shut, the company was left standing exactly where it had started, losing a price war it could not win, except now it was more exhausted, more indebted, and almost entirely out of time. The lifeboat hadn't just failed to arrive. The Pioneer had climbed so far out toward it that when it vanished, there was suddenly nothing left to climb back to. What followed was brutal, and it was fast. With the rescue gone, the company had to face its situation completely naked, and the situation was dire. To survive it all, it cut deeply, laying off a huge portion of its own workforce, by some accounts close to a third of the people who worked there. The founder, the very person who had dreamed the whole thing up, who had taken a defense robotics company and pointed it at the world's living room floors, stepped away from leading the company he had built with his own hands. There was heavy debt to manage, and painfully little cushion left to manage it with. And then came a phrase that, in the cold language of business, is close to a death rattle, a formal warning about the company's ability to continue as what accountants call it going concern. That is the careful, technical way of saying that there is real, serious doubt the business can survive at all. Think about the distance traveled here. This was the inventor of an entire product category. The name that had been synonymous with the future of the modern home. A company admired, studied, imitated across the industry. And its stock, which had once traded at heights that reflected all of that promise, fell by something on the order of 99% from its peak. Very nearly everything, gone. And here is the strangest part. The machine still worked. The robots still cleaned the floor exactly as well as they always had. Customers still had them humming quietly away in their homes. Nothing about the actual product had failed. And yet the company that made it had been hollowed out, almost completely cleaned out of its value, its people, its founder, and its future, all while the little robots kept faithfully, obliviously doing their job. So what do we actually take from this wreckage? Because this is not just a sad little story about one company and one gadget. It's a pattern this channel keeps finding at the bottom of fallen empires, and it carries a warning for anyone who has ever been proud of being first at something. The Pioneer's fatal mistake was believing that creating a category is the same thing as owning it. It is not. Being first buys you attention, admiration, a genuine head start, but it does not buy you immunity. The very moment you prove that a market exists, you have rung a dinner bell for everyone with the means to copy you and the willingness to charge less. Invention is a moat that can drain overnight. Price is a weapon that never ever runs out of ammunition. And then there is a second, quieter lesson buried underneath the first, and it may be the sharper of the two. When the pressure finally grew unbearable, the Pioneer reached for a single, dramatic rescue, one giant buyer, one enormous deal, and bet its entire survival on that one thing closing. It handed its fate to forces it could not control, a corporate buyer's shifting appetite, and the mood of regulators in another part of the world. When that one door closed, it had no second plan and no time left to build one. A company, like a person, is at its most fragile not when it is failing, but when its whole hope is resting on a single thing that lives outside its own hands. So here is what I genuinely want you to sit with, and tell me in the comments below. When you look at the things that feel secure in your own life right now, a job, a skill, a business, a position, a relationship, are you truly sure you own them? Or have you simply been first, or comfortable, for long enough to forget that being first was never the same as being safe? And if the one rescue you're quietly counting on never actually arrives, what, exactly, is your plan then?